Good afternoon and welcome to Liquid Lunch with the Regional Water Authority here on 103.5 WNHH. You can listen to us anytime on your favorite podcast like Apple or Spotify, or you can watch us anytime on New Haven Independent's YouTube page. Just look up New Haven Independent Liquid Lunch. I am Kevin Watsey. I'm the host of the Liquid Lunch with the Regional Water Authority. I'm the Director of Public Affairs over at the Regional Water Authority. But more importantly, I am your resident water nerd. We have another great show today. I'm super excited about it. I hope we all learned something. Today we are joined by Aish Kurutukalam. Sorry if I butchered that. Aish is a director with an organization called ClimateHaven. Today we're all going to learn about ClimateHaven. And why did I have Aish on today? Why do I have her on today? Back in September, the RWA and ClimateHaven announced a very exciting partnership. So I thought it'd be great to have them on to talk about that partnership, but to also talk about what they do. Folks might not be familiar with ClimateHaven, so I thought it'd be a great opportunity to learn more about what they do, what their mission is, the partnership we're doing with them, and we can also answer the 5 unrelated questions and learn more about Aish. Before we get into ClimateHaven, though, we are going to start the show like we start every show. We're going to ask our guests to tell us about herself. In a little segment we call Tell Us Your Story. So Aish, welcome to the show and tell us your story.
Thanks so much for having me, Kevin. Hi, everyone. It's my absolute pleasure to be here today. As Kevin mentioned, I'm Aish. I'm a director here at ClimateHaven. We are a climate tech incubator based right here in New Haven, Connecticut. So my story, I'm originally from India and I'm an economist by training. I started off my career working in consulting for the government, essentially where I focused on large-scale sectoral transformations. So essentially looking at how policy, technology, and innovation could really drive impact. I primarily worked in agriculture and environment. So that really exposed me to all kinds of stakeholders, working with farmers, working with farmer producer organizations, also cooperative societies. But more importantly, I worked a lot with a lot of startups and businesses and entrepreneurs who were trying to solve for the problems that were addressing their community. So I really got to see how grassroots solutions can drive impact, and that really inspired me to work more with entrepreneurs. So I eventually pivoted to venture capital, and through the role at an early stage venture capital fund based in Bombay in India, I got to work with a lot more entrepreneurs and founders. And their thesis at that time was technology for impact. So looking at companies and emerging startups that were not just addressing kind of a big market problem, but at the end of the day, what kind of problem is it solving, and can a lot more people benefit from it? So during that time, we were also thinking through our climate thesis for our new fund, a $150 million fund that we were building. So that's kind of, working on that, trying to understand like what, we talk about climate change so much, and this was, several years ago, but that's when I kind of really evaluated, okay, the climate change is very much real. The less we think about it, we look at solutions to address it, the bigger the problem becomes. And for me, in a lot of ways, it was kind of that aha moment of like, this is where I see myself working in for probably the rest of my career, because it brings together a lot of the different things that I really care about. One, there's the opportunity to really drive impact, because climate change affects everybody, but especially so, the communities that are more disadvantaged impact it the most. And whatever adversities that exist, it gets so much more exacerbated. So beyond that, the reality is that, the International Energy Agency kind of estimates around 50% of the innovations, we don't have 50% of the technologies and innovations that we need to really address climate change. So there's so much that needs to be done within the next 5 years, within the next, 15 years, so that this planet becomes equitable and inhabitable for all. So there was that need for innovation, and through that I could learn a lot. And, I'm constantly, why I started off my kind of studies in economics, because I love putting things together. I love problem solving. And so this seemed like a big problem, and I didn't see any reason to work in any other space. So
what led you from Bombay, India to New Haven, Connecticut?
yeah, so I moved here actually for my grad school at Yale, where I focus further in economics and in climate. And I was honestly really blown away by the innovation ecosystem here. It's really vibrant. Climate tech is really emerging. And so soon after I graduated, I worked with the Entrepreneurship Center at Yale, jointly with the Yale Center for Business and Environment, where I got to lead all the programs and initiatives on climate innovation. So through that, essentially my job was going to all the professors, going to startups, anyone who had an idea. And I got to ask any question I wanted and could get an expert to answer the questions for me and learn a lot through that process, but also be pretty hands-on with the startups in, making that pivot. Like, okay, this is something at the lab. Does that really make sense? What is the market that we can look into? And soon after kind of working at the Entrepreneurship Center, I also worked at Connecticut Innovations, which is the state's strategic venture arm. They have a $100 million climate tech fund. So while I was there, I got to work on a lot more deals and flex a little bit more of my investor side of my brain and build thesis on kind of carbon removal, on long duration energy storage, and a lot of exciting areas and technology themes. And that eventually, I would say, led me to ClimateHaven. And that's kind of where I get to do more of what I love. And honestly, I think it's the best job I've ever had.
That's awesome.
And through my current role now, I lead what we call startup development. Basically, looking at how we can support and engage the brilliant founders who are in this ecosystem and solving for really difficult problems. So they need all the resources that they can get. So my job is to make that happen.
You make that happen. So we're going to talk all about ClimateHaven. We're going to talk about the partnership. But let me ask you a climate change question. It's something I think about often. And so I'm a communications guy. I kind of think about branding and things like that. Do you think the biggest disservice to climate change is when people call it global warming? Because I feel like the second that it snows in September, people say, oh, global warming, look, it's snowing. I think people take it too literally, the word warming, and they don't recognize climate change is not just about warming. And maybe making it too simplistic, but from a branding standpoint, I feel like calling it global warming has done it a disservice. Would you agree with that?
I don't think I have a strong point of view on like the different words used, but I think the reality is kind of whether we call it global warming or climate change, there is a key component of that is like being able to communicate with a larger audience, a larger group of stakeholders where they can resonate with what's really happening. And I think for the longest time, calling it global warming didn't resonate with people because like not everyone experienced that.
Right.
And not a lot of people understood what was really happening or how they were part of it. So I think the probably climate and global warming movement benefited from that ambiguity that existed. But, so climate change is kind of a looser term that probably more people can like associate whatever they want with it. So in a way it works. But the most important aspect of it is like our planet is warming. We probably don't see it, right now in April where it's really cold.
Yeah.
This particular spring, we're not over winter, it seems like. A lot of us must be asking like, is the planet really warming? It seems pretty cold these days.
Yeah. It was freezing this weekend.
Yeah, but the reality is, the core of climate change is essentially as a result of a lot of human activity, of great industrial innovations that have happened. There is a lot more carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases in our atmosphere. And generally, these greenhouse gases are helpful in maintaining the atmosphere, keeping it warm, but we have emitted way too much than our planet can handle.
Yes.
So, and that's resulting in the planet warming. But, our planet is very interesting. There's a lot of different geographies, a lot of different ways that the Earth models and intersects with each other in terms of the ocean, in terms of land and soil and so on. So all that kind of influences how the warming is impacted. But at the end of the day, our planet is warming, and for us to address climate change, we need to bring that down. So the impacts of it is limited, in different communities and different ecosystems.
Yeah, and I'll just make two quick climate change points, and then we'll get into ClimateHaven. I once heard a speech by a climatologist who talked about climate change with specific to rain. And he said, doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get any more or less rain in a year. It just means you're going to get it differently. So instead of getting, if your average rainfall in the month of May is 6 inches, you might get that 6 inches in 2 hours versus over the span of a month. That's kind of how he explained climate change, and that really stuck with me. And I also think about it. I grew up in South Jersey. Mm-hmm. Growing up in New Jersey, we never had tornado warnings. And then 10 years ago, we were getting tornado warnings in South Jersey. It was just tornadoes in New Jersey were not two things that ever went together until they did. Yeah. And I think, it was before I moved here, a tornado ripped through New Haven County 5 or 6 years ago. And I don't think that was a thing 40 or 50 years ago. So, if folks that question climate change should just kind of think about their own lifespan and what has changed with the weather. My grandparents used to talk about getting snowstorms where, the snow was so high on both sides of the street, and not so much. So the climate is changing. I do think calling it global warming did a disservice to the cause from a purely branding standpoint. Yeah. So now that I've given that little speech, let's talk about what we came to talk about. ClimateHaven. So folks who listen to this show know I have a very linear brain when I do these interviews. So I like to start at the beginning. So what is ClimateHaven?
Yeah, absolutely. So we are a platform for climate innovation and entrepreneurship. And at the heart of what we do is incredible and brilliant founders and entrepreneurs who are essentially building solutions for a climate and energy resilient future. So our mission is simple. What these founders have set out to do is pretty difficult, and they need a lot more help to make that happen. So our goal is we can't promise that it'll be easy, so our goal is to make it a little less hard. So when we think of climate tech, so that's kind of, if you're in the sphere of like innovation, addressing climate change, climate tech is the word that's used. And what does that really mean? That's, we need to fundamentally rethink how we live in this world in terms of the materials that we use, in terms of the energy, the fuel, in terms of how we build our homes, in terms of how we move around, how our food is grown. And climate tech is pretty much like a horizontal that cuts through everything and cuts through all these industries and sectors and looks at alternatives, more innovative solutions that are better for us as human beings, better for kind of others on this planet, but at the same time makes more business and operational sense for a company to adopt and is better than what is currently existing in the market. So as a result of that, climate tech is inherently a lot more capital intensive. You're not just writing code. Your first, what you call like a minimum viable product is not just something on a website. It requires really building things, right, chemical reactions happening, hoping it stands upright, a robot working on it, and so on. So it is a lot more capital intensive and therefore takes so much time to get from one stage to another. Beyond that, as I said, it requires really building things, moving things, reactions, atoms, and instead of kind of just bits. And therefore, there is a lot more scientific and technical kind of risk involved, but also problems that are being solved. So there are kind of breakthrough innovations happening. So there's a lot we don't know that needs to be figured out, and therefore the odds are stacked a little more higher for these climate tech founders. And beyond that is also, you could have it figured out at like a lab scale, at a bench scale, but how do you get that really to the market? And that timeline and pathway is not clear at all because no one's done it before. Right. So when there's so many challenges against these climate tech founders, and we truly believe that innovation is the way forward to addressing this problem that all of us do face, we need to have a hub, an ecosystem that brings that all together. And that's essentially what ClimateHaven is. So we bring together the founders in terms of the resources that they could need, being that person, the coach to come to when you have all these questions and you need a lot more guidance to make those decisions. And also a community of peers, of others who have done this in the past, who, ecosystem partners, strategics who can be helpful and find ways to collaborate to really accelerate that timeline.
So as you're talking in my head, I'm thinking decades ago, somebody sitting around saying, I have this great idea to harness the power of the sun to run my house.
Yeah.
ClimateHaven would be the group that would take that idea and give that person the support they need to turn it from an idea into reality. Is that kind of...
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's exactly.
So like solar power, wind power, as a water guy, a couple times a year, I run into somebody who wants to put like hydro turbines in our water mains to generate electricity. And, but the point is we need that pressure in those mains. So it's, we can't have turbines slowing down our water in our mains. But, so how many folks are full-time staff at ClimateHaven? Do you have a big staff?
We're a brilliant team of six. And that comprises former founders, investors, people who have worked, kind of scaling companies, the financing of like early stage to project financing of these different kinds of new emerging tech, but also people who have worked in government and policy on innovation, and also right here in Connecticut. So
the government policy is interesting, right? So before I came here to do the show today, I spoke to some high school kids in a career camp, and we spent time talking about lobbying. And these are high school kids, they're still learning, but I had to explain to them how important policy is to everything we do. And even things they don't think about are impacted by what goes on at state and federal government. And so it's selfishly, I think having somebody on staff that knows how to navigate government is a very smart choice, because it's not easy to navigate.
Absolutely.
I've worked in Washington, D.C. I've worked in state capitals. It's tough. So you have that staff, and you also have executives in residence on staff. So what is their role, and what do they do?
Yeah, I would say the executives are in residence, or EIRs. They play a pretty critical role in the ClimateHaven, within the ClimateHaven platform. So we, as these founders are navigating these different challenges, and they need to make a lot of key decisions. So it can be as simple as, we have a working prototype, and now I think we need to fundraise. So that varies from company to company and industry to industry these days. So it's like, am I raising $500,000 so I can just like build a bigger prototype and get more people excited? Or am I raising $3 million to do something bigger? What does that timeline look like? What does that really, the money means something, but what am I going to do with that money? So, you ideally want to go to, say, a founder who's done this in the past, or an investor who kind of looks at startups like them all day and can be like, okay, I have questions about that. I have questions about
Right, because the investor's not just going to give you the money. They're going to want to see the plan. They're going to want to see your path.
Absolutely. Yeah.
They're not just going to say, oh, here's a check for $100 million. Have fun.
Yeah, exactly. So getting them to that stage of investor readiness requires a lot more work. But while you're putting in that work, you're going to have a lot of questions. So who do you kind of reach out to? So the EIRs are very much an extension of our staff. And we think of it as like, how can we as ClimateHaven provide all the expertise? And that's really grounded in experience. And that's where the EIRs come in to really leverage the gaps.
That's great.
And
so at the beginning of the show, I mentioned that the RWA and ClimateHaven actually announced a partnership late last year. Can you talk a little bit about that partnership and how it came about?
Absolutely. So what stood out early for us was RWA's kind of deep commitment to innovation. It seemed very integrated into the long-term vision for the utility. And now, having spoken to several other utilities and ecosystem stakeholders, that was really refreshing, and not a lot of utilities take that stance. So to have that kind of utility who has that access to a lot of infrastructure can have that so much impact. Be also proactively looking at how can they integrate new innovations, how can they really work with entrepreneurs, emerging technologies, is an incredible organization to be involved with. And on the other side of ClimateHaven, we were already seeing quite a bit of focus in water tech. So if you look at what's coming out of the labs here at UConn, at Yale, and other universities in the region, there is a lot of really awesome kind of membrane technologies, separation technologies, also in kind of wastewater use cases coming out of these labs, and where we see ClimateHaven playing a role in bridging that gap from lab to market. So that's something we're seeing kind of like from the supply side. And I say supply and demand because I'm an economist.
No, that's
fine. But, so therefore coming together with RWA and building the Water Innovation Hub was kind of the perfect opportunity to bring those both worlds together and make it a lot more easier, streamlined, and intentional in how a big organization who has infrastructure, has resources to spare, how can they really work with startups, and how can that be as much of a fruitful partnership? So our role at ClimateHaven in a lot of ways is kind of bringing that together, speaking to startups, speaking to investors, understanding what's missing, and but at the same time with RWA in terms of what can RWA offer that will really benefit this startup and get them to the next stage versus where they are right now. That's
awesome. So I'm going to jump in. If our listeners are sitting there thinking it's a water utility, how innovative can you be? The example I always go to, and this is 100 years ago, but it's still pertinent. We've only been chlorinating drinking water for about 100 years, maybe 120 years. In the 10 years after Jersey City, New Jersey is the first city to start chlorinating their water supply. In the 10 years or so after chlorination started, the average life expectancy went up about 15 years because people were dying of waterborne illnesses. Then somebody had the idea to put low doses of chlorine in the water. An innovator had that idea, and life expectancy went up. It was a very good thing. You could be talking about more efficient filters to get contaminants out of water. You can be talking about new materials to make the pipes out of, maybe materials that don't break as easily as cast iron. There's a whole lot of room for innovation in the water industry. Every day you read about different new chemicals, forever chemicals, PFAS. PFAS is very difficult to get out of water.
Absolutely.
So one innovation that the water industry would welcome is a inexpensive, very efficient way to get PFAS out of the water. Because I like to remind folks that at the end of the day, it's water customers that pay for all of these treatments that the water companies have to do because, A, because they're good to do, but B, because, the government requires us to do it.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to throw that in there for anybody who's thinking the water industry doesn't need innovation because it's water. We need innovation just like anybody else, and there are a lot of incredibly smart people out there trying to do this stuff. So, so this partnership led to the Water Innovation Hub.
Yes.
And as you explained it, it's the ClimateHaven kind of marrying innovators with the RWA and the infrastructure we have in place to test their innovations, little bench pilot studies, things like that.
Yeah.
Is that a good way to characterize it?
Absolutely. A few goals, like one primarily is we want to accelerate the deployment of new technologies. So, kind of the examples you gave, like, it was a novel filter. At the initial stages, it was something that's being tested out of the lab. But how can you really say that, given the amount of volume that will need to go through to the filter, will it actually stay put? Will it actually take off the contaminants that it promises to? You really need to test it on the ground to really know for sure. And the reality is there's not a lot of pilot opportunities for a startup to test that out. And unless you have that validation, the technical validation that proves out this is really viable, you can't, how do you get to your first customer? You can say, like, in theory, this works.
Yes, right, yeah.
But no one's willing to kind of be your first customer because you're like, okay, does it work if I want a filter of this size and I want it to run, 24/7 because that's the use case for kind of purifying our drinking water? Then you're like, maybe. But you want to have more opportunities where you can pilot and de-risk so many elements of your technology. So that's something that we want, we're intending, and you hear soon through future announcements that we want to offer more of these opportunities for startups to really validate that aspect of their technology. But at the same time, we want to make it easier that it's not just you do a pilot, like, okay, it works out at this scale. We also want that to enable commercialization of that startup. So when we're looking at challenges, it's not solely, this is a cool innovation. It'd be really nice to have this kind of pipe or this kind of a drone doing these things. But the more important aspect is like, what kind of problem is it really trying to solve? Is if RWA is the utility, is the customer that's going to kind of come in after the pilot, is it really solving kind of business professional at RWA, an operator or technicians kind of key day-to-day problems? Is innovation solving that need?
Yeah.
And that's something that we at ClimateHaven have been really trying to understand more of and help bridge so that the startups are not just kind of working in this in their independent bubble of like, yeah, this is really cutting edge solutions, but like nobody really wants it. So really enabling that pathway to commercialization is the second element of the hub. And the third, I would say, is bringing together this ecosystem of startups that are working in the space, pilot partners that could come in like RWA, but also others who can provide that test bed, that the just space maybe, or just infrastructure, or like water samples so that startups can start really being on the ground versus being at a R&D stage. But also others who can, kind of the data that's coming out of the pilots, how can we leverage that so that our collective understanding and knowledge about this industry really does improve? Or, when you take the example of PFAS, like very fascinating, PFAS did the job that it intended to do so well that we can't get it out of our water.
Yes.
So now, but it would benefit us all if we, there were more pilots out there, more trials, and we were all sharing that information and knowledge. So that could be solved in a faster timeline. So being that hub for knowledge as well. And beyond that also, this idea could work at a certain stage, but you need a lot of capital in investment to take it to the next level. So how can we de-risk that? How can we bring in investors and others to take it to the next stage? Kind of the key components of it.
And I would add, so you said, well, in theory, I was just last week talking to an engineer who was telling me about this pilot. And I said to him, well, if you do A, won't that cause B? And his exact words were, in theory, it shouldn't. That didn't make me feel better. I would add two additional things to, I guess, the kind of innovation and testing phase that I know you're thinking about, but I think people in general may not be thinking about. And that's, is your solution to problem A actually causing a new problem, right? So I brought up chlorine, right? So we chlorinate the water, it kills all the dirty stuff and the bad stuff in water, but there is actually something called disinfection byproducts. So that's basically, your chlorine gets rid of all the bad things in the water, but it actually does add a different kind of contaminant to the water. So, obviously, RWA is very good at managing those, and there are limits on those, and it's all fine. But that's a perfect example of a solution to one thing actually causing a new problem. So, and the other thing I would add is scalability, right? So, just because it's effective on 1 gallon of water, will it be effective on 45 million gallons of water a day? Absolutely. Which is on average what the RWA pumps, treats, and delivers out to customers. My water company in New Jersey averaged about 335 million gallons of water a day. We had one treatment plant that was 200 of those 300, put out 200 million gallons of water a day. So scalability is obviously very important too. But yeah, as you were talking, I was just thinking, like, it's so important that you're not just solving a problem, but you're making sure you don't create another problem with your solution. So, I'm excited about that as a water nerd. I love this stuff. I love, when I am talking to people that are way smarter than me that have these ideas for the future. And I did want to back up too. We keep talking about PFAS. So PFAS is perfluorinated compounds. They're called forever chemicals because they're very hard to get rid of. They're in almost everything. They're in waterproof. They're being phased out. They're in things that are waterproof. They're in things, all Teflon. Teflon is PFAS. Teflon is pure PFAS. Firefighting foam. It's in everything. The government has set regulations, limits on that. And so water companies, even though we didn't cause the problem, we are finding it in the water and we have to get it out of the water. So, and it's not easy to get out of the water.
Yeah.
And the technologies that exist right now are incredibly expensive to get it out of the water. So, that's just a little thing on PFAS. It's kind of the topic du jour in the water industry. So, I'm super excited about the Water Innovation Hub. It sounds like, again, as a water nerd, I love it. Let's talk a little bit about ClimateHaven other than water, because you're not just doing water stuff, right? So, there's climate innovation. As I said, I think about like solar 100 years ago. Mm-hmm. I just watched something on the news that was carbon capturing. They're building these giant carbon capturing thing, and it was and it was fascinating because some environmentalists are saying it's complete hogwash. Mm-hmm. And that's being funded by the coal producing plants to try and make everybody feel better about what they do. Mm-hmm. Other people think that it actually could be scalable and a solution. Yeah. So when I hear climate innovation, I think about those things. So I guess, again, we'll start at the beginning. What other kind of climate innovation things is ClimateHaven working on, to the degree you can talk about them? Because I know some of it's proprietary and you can't give away trade secrets, but I'd love to talk a little bit about that. Yeah,
so we launched ClimateHaven officially around 1.5 years ago. So we still, in a lot of ways, a startup ourselves, I would say.
You're a startup.
Yeah. But at the core of it, we have over 25 different companies, startups that are building innovative solutions. And that ranges everything from kind of building, using 3D printers or robots to create affordable homes, or kind of carbon removal, as you mentioned, but both from kind of carbon removal within your soil, or like carbon removal using wastewater and the carbon that's rich in wastewater and through incineration processes and things like that. And other areas also include a lot of what this ecosystem is really good at is kind of green chemistry, as we call it. The father of green chemistry is actually just probably a few blocks down from here. And what that really means is how are the fundamental chemicals, and think everything from what goes into our lotion, into our soap, into our detergents, into our solvents, but also in our fuels. What is the primary feedstock that goes into it? And most often it is petroleum feedstocks. And how do you kind of transfer that? Like at the end of the day, the compound is the same, but how can you use different kinds of feedstocks to get the same compound? And how can that process be a lot more efficient so it can scale? So there's a lot of innovations within that green chemistry space, be it kind of alternate kinds of materials that's coming out, but also alternate kind of fuels. So how can we use, say, if you are looking at, a lot of these kind of say coal, ideally not coal, but say other heavy industry emitters that can't phase out of, say, fossil fuels in, say, the next 5 to 10 years. They're going to keep running. So how can we, at the same time, use the emitted carbon dioxide and use that for something else? So one of our companies, Oxys Energy, takes that waste carbon dioxide and converts it into green methanol. And green methanol essentially can be used as a fuel both in aviation. So our flights, kind of planes can run on this green methanol, but also for shipping. A lot of the global maritime transportation, really, fuel is the biggest cost both for flying as well as shipping. And how can we really reduce that? It's being able to have alternate sources of fuel that can really compete at scale. So those are kind of some of the solutions that we see at ClimateHaven.
That's awesome. I kind of, as we talk about this, I kind of picture you guys as like climate Shark Tank. Does ClimateHaven, are you actually giving them the investment, or are you just providing the resources where these innovators still have to go find their own kind of capital? Or are you guys actually writing them checks as well?
Yeah, we don't write checks. I would say we were founded essentially by a lot of ecosystem stakeholders here, recognizing that these founders, recognizing the inherent challenges that climate tech faces, as I mentioned, they need a lot more resources to get to the stage of being investor ready. So where we come in is kind of getting them to that stage through hands-on, say, strategic guidance, helping in the company building aspect of it, making valuable introductions and connections to strategic partners or your first customer or pilot opportunities, so that you can prove out different aspects of your business at each stage, that you're kind of like de-risking things as you go. And you get to a stage where you are investable, and a lot of the role that we play is also in making those introductions to investors. But that's kind of like in the broader sense of the way, but in a more integrated sense. One of our founding partners is also Connecticut Innovations, who I work with, and they have a $100 million climate tech fund. So what's interesting about them as an organization, they are a quasi-governmental agency. They are interested in taking bets on companies that are building here in Connecticut, and the climate tech fund especially is 100 million dedicated to the funds that are solving for climate change that have some presence in Connecticut. So a lot of these companies at ClimateHaven, we essentially trying to get them to a stage where CI can invest in them.
Okay.
And CI has in the past they've made several investments based on that kind of support and resources that have been provided. So in a way, we have kind of a sister agency that kind of puts in the check, and we get to go really deep with the stuff.
That's awesome. And I mentioned Shark Tank. I honestly think I could not have had this conversation 10 years ago, but because I watch Shark Tank, I actually do feel like I understand a lot of what you're talking about, because in some ways it's the same. I think folks can get a pretty decent business education watching Shark Tank, because they really do ask the right questions, and a lot of the things you're saying, I think about Shark Tank. I think about the types of questions, like, and the responses where, those folks will say, I don't think you're ready yet. I don't think this is scalable yet. I think you need to do a little bit more of this. And I'll just say, you said you have 25 right now,
that's right.
25 startups in a year and a half. So I think that just kind of speaks to the necessity of a group like ClimateHaven. How are you choosing as an organization which startups you're going to support? I mean, there's 25. Have you turned down 200 to get the 25, or what is your, I guess, criteria for inclusion?
Absolutely, we definitely look at one of the core is what kind of is it a science project at this time, or are you really committed to making it a venture? Because there are a lot of resources in terms of R&D, really exploring the technical side of things, but are you committed to making it a viable business? And is someone on the team, a founder, dedicated to really exploring that? Because the reality of building a climate tech startup is it's going to be a long journey. So you need to kind of have some conviction, like, this is my calling, I need to do this, and I need to get started. So is it kind of, what stages is it? Is it like actually on its pathway to a venture? Because that's where we can be helpful. But beyond that, how we test that out is understanding, one, do the founders have a good understanding of the problem they're trying to solve, how big it is, what the customer needs are, have they spoken to their potential market? Because often a lot of founders were like, we worked on things on the lab, like, it seems like this could be applicable for XYZ industry,
theory.
but like, have you spoken to anybody in that sector? I'm like, no, but we think it could be good. So that's kind of a mental mindset shift that needs to happen from being kind of a scientific researcher to and a kind of startup founder.
All right.
And beyond that, beyond the kind of traction, it's also really getting to, how the team and who's kind of comprising of, like, who's going to make this happen. Are they really committed? Are they willing to kind of put in the hours? And how receptive are they of kind of understanding, like, they are not going to know a lot of things, but like, this journey is going to require a lot of people asking them questions. And honestly, my job is basically just asking a lot of questions, which is the best part, but being able to kind of still find that curiosity in that process, still be open to feedback, and really get it to
a little bit of humility.
Yes, a more flourishing.
Yeah.
A little bit of humility, but also at the same time, a lot of people are going to say, hey, you can't do it. So you kind of need to be, pretty confident
confident in your idea, but maybe, but like you said, willing to accept that you don't know everything.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, because I know, working with engineers, I always say there's a brain, there's an engineering brain.
Yeah.
And a lot of folks, my idea is going to work, and that's, and you just have to trust me, my idea is going to work. But it's interesting when you said it about kind of switching their brain into more of a business, from scientist to like a business person. Yeah. And I imagine that's not very easy for a lot of scientists.
Yeah, that's not very easy, and that's where I would say we can be really helpful. Yeah,
no, I think that's great. So I'm going to ask you to, actually, I'll save that question. Mm-hmm. ClimateHaven also has some other programs. Can you spend a little bit of time talking about So you got the incubator, and then you have specific programs within ClimateHaven. Can you talk a little bit about some of those?
Yes. So over the last 1 year, what we've recognized as being one of the most valuable parts of being part of the incubator is the hands-on support we can provide. So leveraging both staff expertise, EIR expertise, but also this ecosystem of mentors and experts to really go hands-on with the startup in a shorter kind of time frame. And so we are in the works of kind of launching an accelerator pretty soon. And it's kind of in early stages, so not ready to announce it yet. But what we've, we are a startup ourselves, so we've been doing our pilot sprints with our startups to see if this is something that works. And what we've been hearing so much is the value of an accelerator is, one, you probably will be doing the thing anyway. If you're a committed, brilliant founder, probably you could achieve what you set out to do. But the role of being at an accelerator is being able to accelerate that timeline much faster and being able to be very effective in making decisions. Like not us, the founder being able to make decisions, and how can we support that as much as possible. So I think with the experts we have, because a lot of people on a team have that founder and investor experience, we are able to kind of ask those difficult questions and get the founders to make decisions so they can move to the next stage, because there's always a lot of decisions to be made. So it's moving forward, and how can we accelerate that? So that's something we're really excited about.
You kind of paralysis by analysis.
Yeah.
You just get so stuck in the what if, should I, shouldn't I, and that could kill you. I mean, I you see it happen in everyday life, but I imagine when the stakes are very high, when people have invested a lot of money in you, you could get stuck in that rut of decision making. Mm-hmm. So I'll ask you to play a little bit of a prognosticator. 10 years from now, I mean, do you see, so you probably have more of a view on kind of climate innovation than most people. What kind of world do you think we're going to be living 10 years from now as far as innovation? Do you think electric cars, everybody's going to be driving an electric car? Will we still have gas engines, or or is it solar? Where's the future for kind of climate change and climate technology? It's a big question.
Yeah, it is a big question.
And I didn't tell you I was going to ask that one, but this conversation just made me think, like, what's the world going to look like? Because 20 years ago, I don't think we pictured solar panels on residential roofs.
Yeah,
things like that.
I think the world is going to look very different. Like just to take an example of like electric cars. Like I know it's difficult talking about Tesla as much anymore, but like why did we all want to buy a Tesla? Because it was a better car. It was comparable in price, and there was no question of like, oh, like if I can afford it, I might as well get the better car. So, but what you compare, and like the value, just the additional benefit is that it's actually better for the planet as well. So sorry to interrupt. Is it like, and I don't know the answer to this, but you hear people say, well, the effects on the planet to make those batteries, and then the increase you need, from coal producing electric plants to charge those cars, is it really a wash? So I don't know the answer to that, but what do you think about that as far as electric cars? Yeah, I mean, the challenge with climate change is like, it's not like you can solve one thing alone.
It's kind of what we talked about.
Yes,
a solution to one thing may cause another problem.
And which is why I would say one takeaway, at least from this conversation, and generally people interested in working or like understanding or care about climate, is just like work in the space, because every job could essentially be a climate job. And being involved helps you understand like how these things interact with each other. So yeah, taking the example of like batteries and like the battery supply chain, a big subsector within climate tech is the circular economy. Like how can we reuse a lot of the materials that have already been extracted and rely less on kind of mining, rely less on kind of other extractive processes, and what is the pathway there? And so this is what brings me back to innovation, because I'm like, okay, if we have more innovation that can kind of detect mining better, it is not using the same practices we had, like say 100 years ago, then that could make that process efficient. And if we have technology that can kind of extract from a battery, like take a Tesla, one of the startups we had was being able to take a battery and using thermal and kind of sonic sensing, understand the state of the battery at that time without breaking it open.
Okay.
So that enables you to understand like how much life is really left, which components can be utilized and can be repurposed. And that's the role of the innovation that plays. So that can kind of build a circular economy. So I think that's where like there's so much innovation potential that exists and a lot of founders solving for that. So I think the reality and the answer is like, yes, a lot of these solutions, when it scales, it will result in amplifying and aggravating problems, new problems. And how we think about like climate tech is to be as systemic as possible. That is like, are we at net trying to make it better? Are we trying our best to minimize those impacts as possible? But the reality is like, you probably can't solve everything. Like you're not going to have like, if we're going to put so much pressure on like one solution, like it's going to have to be perfect.
Yeah.
That's a pretty high bar, I would say. And on the side of like the grid, and in terms of will we need to meet the higher energy demand, will we have to rely on coal? You know, the benefit of like, you know, solar and wind, those technologies have been around for so long that like it is pretty cheap. Like it's in some cases, in some areas, cheaper than fossil fuel. So the more we invest in those kind of technologies and let them scale and let the economies of scale benefit, it's actually cheaper, the more it's a no-brainer for it to be adopted. Like, for example, my home back in India, we have rooftop solar, and not because, you know, one aspect is like it was getting hotter. We were, you know, naturally gravitating to putting the air conditioner on all the time, and our electricity bill was going up. And then when we made the kind of like exploring options, like the initial investment of solar would like offset what our bills were, just like, you know, we would get that return on investment just in a couple of years. So for us, it was just like, on an economic sense, it made perfect sense to do that. So I would say that's kind of where it all comes together. Like, how can we help founders who are kind of solving for a world that we really don't know as much? Like, how can we get them there? And I think I see my vision for the future through these founders, and I'm really excited about that.
Yeah, I agree. The circle economy to me is where it's at. You know, one person's trash is another person's treasure, right?
Yeah.
You know, even and you know, people aren't going to want to hear this, but in our world, it's called toilet to tap. You know, where you know you're flushing your toilet, and that's being treated and recycled back into your tap. Because you know, I used to tell school children the water you're drinking now was once dinosaur pee. Because all the water that's on Earth is the same water that was around during the dinosaurs, and you know we know how to clean it, we know how to make it drinkable. Obviously, you know we're so you know there are parts of the United States that toilet to tap is a real thing. Out in California and Arizona, where they have significant droughts and not a lot of water supply, you're flushing your toilet, it's being treated and sent right back to you, and it's 100% safe. You know, a lot of folks don't realize wastewater in general is treated to about 90% of what drinking water is before it's put back into the waterways. So to get that extra 10%, it's not really that hard. So again, I always bring it back to water, but you know, the circle economy in water is toilet to tap. Luckily, we're very water rich here on the East Coast and in New England, so I don't think in our lifetimes that's going to be a discussion. But there are towns I know of that, you know, put in what's called purple pipe, and they're using treated wastewater to water the crops. And I used to play at a golf course that had a direct connection to the wastewater treatment plant a mile away, and so they were using treated wastewater to water the greens and the fairways. And it was the greenest green and fairway you've ever seen because it had some nutrients in it from that wastewater. Yeah. So, you know, we got a few minutes left, and I do want to get to our unrelated questions. But if folks want to learn more about ClimateHaven, you know, where could they go?
You should visit our website. It's called climatehaven.tech. We have a monthly newsletter called the ClimateHaven Circular. Be sure to subscribe, and you can stay updated on startups working out and building a climate haven, but also events and other ways you can engage. Well,
there you go. Even if you forget that website, just Google it. ClimateHaven. It'll come right up. So let's do our 5 unrelated questions. These are questions that are completely unrelated to anything we've talked about. They will just let us get to know Aish a little bit more. First question: do you have any pets?
No.
No pets.
Unfortunately, not
Did
yet.
you ever have any pets growing up, or
No.
No? Okay, so when you get a pet, what kind of pet you want?
A dog.
A dog?
Yeah.
Okay. Big or little?
Little. Medium.
Medium. Okay, there you go. Split the difference. Who's your favorite band or musician?
Currently, I would say it's a band called Peter Cat Recording Company. It's an Indian jazz band.
Oh,
So it's interesting because they mix genres quite a bit. They use Indian musical instruments, but also have like electronic beats. So it's pretty fun.
do they ever play over here in the United States? Or?
Yeah, I saw them twice.
Oh, really?
Yeah, in the
Nice.
US, and I think they're playing again in like 2 weeks or
Nice.
so. It's been fun.
What is your favorite hobby when you're not being a climate innovator and funder?
I would say related to that is like I do love music a lot.
Yeah,
So,
going to concerts. And
Yeah, so any live music is kind of an easy way to make me happy, I would say.
Do you play any instruments?
You know, the typical COVID ukulele hobby.
So you're a COVID musician.
But yeah, so a lot of hobbies that emerged out of COVID.
Yes, absolutely. I started riding my
and
bike.
I
during
guess
COVID.
why I enjoy live music so much more now, because there was a time when we couldn't access it.
It's true. Concerts are great.
Yeah.
I love live music too. I'm with you. Cookies, brownies, or ice cream?
Ice cream any day.
What
And
flavor?
then, I do love Arethusa so much, and the dark chocolate chip. I'm pretty basic that way, but I do love it.
That's okay. Listen, it's all good. There's no bad ice cream. And the final unrelated question: who was your favorite teacher in school and why?
So probably gonna answer that a little differently. It's
Okay.
not my teacher in school. So I come actually from a family of teachers.
Oh,
My
okay.
grandfather, my grandparents. My grandfather was a physics teacher. My mom was a physics teacher, and all different sides. There's teachers everywhere. I would say my grandfather has been my favorite kind of teacher, because like every summer when we used to go stay with him, you would think you don't have to kind of think about physics anymore, but like he would have like all these surprise questions where it's like, yeah, so the Ohm's law, let's let's talk about that again. But it was so great to have kind of a mentor and a teacher in your life who's like thought about learning and exploring curiosity so deeply, and it was like integrated into their life. I think that's really sparked a lot in me. So
That's great.
Yeah.
So you couldn't just ride the roller coaster with Grandpa. You'd have to learn about Newton and his laws of gravity as you're
Yeah.
going down the roller coaster.
Absolutely.
It's gravity pulling us down.
Yeah.
That's funny. That's great. Physics is the only class I ever failed in high school. I just could not wrap my brain around physics.
Yeah, it's a very fascinating subject.
Yeah. Again, there are different types of brains. I think like there's an engineering brain, and then there's my brain, and was not a physics person. So, well, thank you so much for coming on the show. This has been a really fascinating discussion. I could probably do another hour asking you other questions. I get to do an hour asking you economic questions about what's going on right now, but I won't. So, Aish, thank you for joining us on this edition of Liquid Lunch. For our listeners out there, if there's one thing I want you to take away from our conversation today, it's that ClimateHaven is, while they're new, there's obviously a need for what they're doing in supporting these climate innovators, these inventors who are really trying to solve current and future problems to make the planet livable for our kids and our grandkids and our great-grandkids. And if you want more information on ClimateHaven, you can just Google them, sign up for their newsletter. They're a terrific organization. You've been listening to Liquid Lunch here on 103.5. My name is Kevin Watsey, and today we've learned all about ClimateHaven. If you've missed any portion of today's show, you can go on YouTube and Google New Haven Independent Liquid Lunch. You can download us as a podcast. And we'll close the show by asking you to raise a big glass of water, stay hydrated, and cheers to another great liquid lunch. Until our next show, this is Kevin Watsey. Thanks.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.